Very good evening from the Standard Group Center. Many thanks for joining us this 19th day of September 2017. Kenyans counting down the hours until that much expected, much anticipated full judgment by the highest court in the land over the nullification following that decision to invalidate the presidential election results of August 8th general election. Many thanks for staying with us. We have a lot for you here on the program. A lot happening on the judiciary. Just 2 days or just a day after an NGO put in a petition at the Judicial Service Commission seeking to remove 2 judges of the Supreme Court, that is Judge Isaac Lenaola and Deputy Chief Justice Philomena Mwilu. The Chief Justice David Maraga has come out guns blazing, seemingly unbowed, saying that he and the rest of the Supreme Court judges are ready to pay the ultimate price and defend the Constitution and do what's right, stand for what is right. Let's listen to what the CJ had to say in that earlier statement earlier today by the Judicial Service Commission. Shall be giving you that a little later on. But there was also, in connection to that, there were demonstrations in the CBD and other towns across the country by Jubilee supporters putting up the pressure, turning the screw on the Supreme Court judges over their decision on the 1st of September. Let's take a look at what happened earlier today. Protesters outside the Supreme Court here in Nairobi, and we understand there are protests in Nakuru as well as Kikuyu Town and Eldoret. Jubilee supporters basically protesting against the Supreme Court judges. A lot of pressure on the highest court in the land, and then there was a tough statement by the Judicial Service Commission where Chief Justice David Maraga did issue warnings to politicians who have been issuing statements against the judges of the Supreme Court. It did hit out at the Inspector General of Police, Joseph Boynet, for not acting to protect the members of the judiciary. And he also did vow to fight to defend the Kenyan Constitution and do what is right. Let's listen in.
The Judicial Service Commission would like to state that we unreservedly condemn these mindless acts of aggression against the judiciary and reiterate that even if anything happens to the individual judges, staff, or their families, those making these inciting statements will be held personally responsible. The Judicial Service Commission notes with dismay that the Inspector General of Police, who is expected to provide security to all government facilities, has repeatedly ignored calls to act, exposing judicial officers, property, and litigants to danger. The judiciary is an arm of government equal to the executive and the legislature. If leaders are tired of having a strong and independent judiciary, they should call a referendum and abolish it altogether.
Let's now bring in two of the most renowned members or advocates of the Kenyan High Court. I have with me lawyer Edwin Sifuna and Karanja Kabage to just help us put perspective into some of these issues as Kenyans continue to wait for that full judgment by the Supreme Court of Kenya. Edwin, judging by what has been happening today, that petition against two more judges of the Supreme Court, Lenaola and Mwilu, and now this statement by the Judicial Service Commission. What is your initial reaction to all this?
First, it is quite a sad day that the Chief Justice of the Republic has to come out and ask that Kenyans of goodwill stand up for this institution that we gave unto ourselves when we promulgated this constitution. Right. I am sure that I speak for many Kenyans when I can assure the Chief Justice that there are many Kenyans of goodwill who will stand up to defend the institution of the judiciary. It is quite unfortunate. I do not know, looking at the protests that we have seen in Jubilee areas, I do not know what motivation there is or what they are meant to achieve, because I don't know if they've been advised that those protests could actually change the decision that is going to be read tomorrow, or that it is going to intimidate anyone, because the truth of the matter is that Chief Justice Maraga has stated very clearly, and he speaks for many of us when he says that he is ready to lay down his life in defense of the rights of Kenyans and the rights in the Bill of Rights. So I do not understand what those protests are meant to achieve. I think it should go on record that the Jubilee government in this election cycle are the first party to actually mobilize systematic mass protests, what they like to call, mass action. I mean,
you think that is what they've done?
And it's intimidation. And you could see even the pain of the Chief Justice going as far as calling out the Inspector General of Police. I mean, there is absolutely no way you could let protesters come that close to the gates of the Supreme Court, even trying to bring them down.
All right. Mr. Kabage, would you say that the Kenyan judiciary is under siege?
Well, I think our constitution is very explicit in allowing peaceful protest. I haven't seen anything to show that there was any violence meted against a person of the judicial arm, or even anything to that effect. These protests are not even anything different from the protests we have seen from the opposite side. I think for me, Kenyans have a right.
All right, let me interrupt you a bit, Wanakabage. We'll come to you very shortly. Let's know, it's a story we've been keeping an eye on, and our very own Sophia Wanuna has been following the happenings at the Supreme Court and the petitions that was filed yesterday and reactions, and we'll be speaking to a member of the Judicial Service Commission. Sophia, good evening. What can you tell us about these petitions, and then who are you talking to tonight?
Good evening, Ben. Yes, as you were discussing there with your guest, the petitions that the Secretary to the Judicial Service Commission, that's the Chief Registrar of the Judiciary, Anna Madi, has confirmed receipt of 3. That was filed by Ngunjiri Wambogo. It was delivered to the JSC on the 14th. Today, in a letter, the Secretary to the JSC confirming receipt of that petition to remove the Chief Justice. Also, a petition on the Deputy Chief Justice, Philomena Mwilu, as well as Judge of the Supreme Court, that is Isaac Lenaola. So 3 in total that have been received. And want to talk a little bit more about also what we saw later on, that statement from the Chief Justice in his capacity as the chairperson of the Judicial Service Commission. One of the members who flanked him in that press conference earlier this afternoon was Tom Ojenda, who is a commissioner or a member of the JSC representing the Law Society of Kenya. He joins me now. Thank you so much for making time for us. Let's begin with whether you feel from that statement by the CJ earlier today that the judiciary is under siege.
I think clearly, yes. I would say that at no time has the independence of the judiciary and the exercise of judicial function under been so much spotlight and pressure I think, more than now. This is the first time that this has happened, and I think this is unprecedented, I must say.
Yeah. The Office of the Inspector General has come to disown those claims that were made by the CJ in that statement from the JSC that they have not been providing security, or at least taking seriously the security concerns being raised by the various judges. What do you say to that, and as far as them saying they take a great concern with that statement?
Now, I think the statement was in respect to the fact that today there were demonstrations outside the Supreme Court, and there was no intervention. The police watched. I think that is the background. I think that happened yesterday, that happened today. And remember that the Supreme Court is due to deliver the full judgment of the court sometime tomorrow. And I think I experienced it firsthand. We were unable to leave court today. We had a JSC meeting and you could hardly get out. You had the public hurling insults at us while just being out there, and it was really scary, I must say. And I can imagine what judges had to go through today, because judges could not leave the Supreme Court. They had to use a back exit. They had to be taught, they had to be assisted, escorted out of court. That really is a real threat to the physical person of the judges. And I believe that it is something which the IG would have dealt with. I mean, nothing would have been easier than to get police officers to ask the crowd to disperse.
Yes.
That did not happen. And I think that is the backdrop of the statement by the Chief Justice. Makes sense.
Yes. Also, a final concern from that statement is that Chief Justice talking about being ready to make the ultimate sacrifice. And many have been wondering what that means. Would you...
I think the ultimate sacrifice is ultimate. As the Judicial Service Commission, the ultimate sacrifice is simply, I think the meaning must be that they would do what they have to as a commission to ensure that judges, magistrates, and other judicial officers or staff performing their function are not threatened or affected by statements made from without the judiciary. The call of judicial independence is enshrined in the Constitution. The structures and the functioning of government is in the Constitution. And I think the ultimate price basically means that the Commission, as the final keeper or the final body that protects and speaks for the judiciary, has to come out and uphold what the Constitution provides with respect to judicial independence. I think that is the point. That's the ultimate the ultimate prize. That commissioners will do what when the call of duty, when there is need to speak in protection of judges, that the Commission must speak. And I think that's what the Commission did. That's what it does all the time.
Let's talk about the petitions. And you have the 3-1 against the CJ, the DCJ, both are members of the Judicial Service Commission. So will they have to recuse themselves when it comes to hearing of these matters?
I think the processes of the Judicial Commission are set out in the Judicial Service Act. And the Commission as a body will function independently. And I think that once a complaint is received, it is processed in accordance with the provisions of the Judicial Service Act, which requires that parties be given notice to respond to petitions filed against them, and which then will be processed in a manner. It depends on the gravity of the claims that are made.
But they surely can't sit in matters discussing them.
Yes, on the questions of processes, that will depend on how the Commission deals at the time the petition is presented before the Commission.
All right, final question. There are petitions as well across the other judges, Ojwang and Njoki, as well as Ibrahim. These were petitions filed last year. Why are they still before the JSC?
Those petitions are the subject of litigation in the High Court. And I believe that the reason why they are not yet concluded is because there's a petition challenging the powers of the JSC to entertain some of those petitions. Okay. And I believe the JSC, as I told you, is a body that respects the rule of law. We function and are guided by the rule of law. Okay. And we are respecters of the law, of the Constitution, and always we ensure that whatever we do is fit for every Kenyan. Right. And I think that is, you will know that the women and men who sit in the Judicial Service Commission are very fair people. They are very independent people. Right. And they're people who will listen to all sides.
Many thanks.
Yes,
Many thanks, Professor Tom Ojenda. They are talking to us. Ben, back to you.
Thank you, Sophia. Sophia Anuna, they are talking to a member of the JSC, Professor Tom Ojenda. Many thanks, Sophia. Now, back to our conversation, gentlemen. Bonakabage, you're talking about this being peaceful demonstrations earlier today, but the CJ did say that the Inspector General of Police ignored calls to beef up security of the judges and the courts.
Well, let me state for record that protests in our Constitution is allowed. You don't have to like it, but that's the way it is. The framers of our Constitution are very explicit in saying that Kenyans have a right to protest. And that protest can be directed against the parliament, as we have seen in the past. Right. It can be directed against the judiciary, as we have seen now, and even can be directed against the executive. What to me would be going beyond the protest is anything like violence meted on any individual. But if it's a question of protesting, it's okay. Let's listen to it. My concern is two things. What the Chief Justice has alleged, the Inspector General of Police, in his mandate, he has not provided the services that is due to the judiciary. That I find it serious. The second statement, which I find very serious by the Chief Justice, is the fact that if the politicians do not like the judiciary, they can invoke the referendum as provided for under Chapter 6 of our Constitution. Right. Articles 255, 256, and 257, particularly 255. Now, that is a very extreme and alarmist statement that has been made by the Chief Justice, and I'll tell you why. If you look at Chapter 1 of our Constitution, and what is termed as the sovereignty and the supremacy of the Constitution, yes, it is very clearly stated that the people of Kenya are the one that delegate the mandate of governance to the following institutions: the parliament, meaning the elected representatives, and 2, the executive branch of government, and 3, the judiciary, which is the other branch of the governance of this country. Right. So it is really, we should not make certain statements.
To be fair to the CJ, you were speaking from the premise that if politicians do not like an independent judiciary like the one that he says he heads, then because politicians have been speaking about this. Edwin, you're
I just want to finish. It's very important to answer you. Let me tell you something, and this is very, and I'm sure my colleague here will bear witness. It is not the politicians that determines whether we should have judiciary. No. This is the people of Kenya. This is the people of Kenya. So it is not the politicians who can make any statement that they want to make. The people of Kenya are the ones that have given powers, in fact, dedicated powers of judicial authority to the JSC, the judiciary. And that should be very, very clear.
Mr. Sifuna, do you think...
Two things, Ben. You know, the Chief Justice was being extremely diplomatic, which is something that I don't have to do myself. When he talks about the senior politicians, he's talking about President Uhuru Kenyatta. The statements that he has made as a head of state directed at individual judges of the Supreme Court, even when you do not agree with the decision of the court, there is a very fine line between criticism of the decision of a court and personal attacks on the judges. And we all know, you know, Mr. Karanja Kabage might not admit, but every political process, for instance, even how we came to have this particular constitution, is a political process that is mobilized by politicians. Uhuru Kenyatta has followers. That is why you saw he has mobilized them to come out across the country. It is his doing. So he knows, the Chief Justice is speaking from a position that if there was mobilization to amend the constitution to do away with this institution that has been demonized and made to appear to be so vile by a senior politician who we did not want to name, but I can name, Uhuru Kenyatta, then he can very well mobilize his supporters, collect enough signatures, and bring a referendum question to the people that let's do away with this institution. I want to be the supreme leader of the country. Number two, the thing that we want to protest on the manner in which, on the issue of the demonstrations today, right, we as the opposition are more than well-schooled on Article 37. We have been the foremost defenders of Article 37, and we've borne the brunt of the abuse of Article 37 by the police forces in this country. What we are saying is that look at the manner in which the protests today have been dealt with, as opposed to the manner where political protests from the other side are actually dealt with. You've seen what happened following the declaration of the results, Ben. Police were actually going into people's houses, bludgeoning infants in their beds. I mean, so we have a situation on the other side where protesters make all the way, their way all the way to the gates of the Supreme Court and actually trying to bring them down. You had our representative, and he represents both of us in the Judicial Service Commission senior agenda, saying that the judges were even denied right of ingress and egress from the courts, and that by the time they were leaving, there were people there hurling insults at them. I mean, just create a cordon that allows these people to protest in a manner that does not interfere with the police. Right. You saw yourselves as members of the media that during the hearing of the petitions, we had to park our vehicles all the way at DTB on Mombasa Street. Right. We had no access to the courts. Where are all those big trucks that block the road all the way from University Way that do not allow people to access the courts? Surely.
Mr. Kabage, two questions. Yeah. If you can answer Edwin's question, why didn't we see the cordoning off of the streets, Wabera Street and all that, in today's demonstrations? We are very close to the Supreme Court. And then, do you agree with, what is your take on the President's words towards Maraga? We've had words like Wakora and all that.
Well, let me respond in the first place regarding the issue. First of all, those protesters, if they were there, which we have seen they were, I just want to be very clear, is that I didn't see a caption showing that the judges were being prevented from walking from their chambers. I haven't seen it. I don't know whether you saw it.
You've heard Agenda say it.
Agenda has said it, but have you seen it? All right? Now, the second thing is this. We are talking about the statement that was made by the President. But I also want to remind Kenyans, because sometimes I think Kenyans have got a very fickle memory. Raila, since 2013, when the Supreme Court made its ruling, where he lost the judgment, what did he talk about? He said the judges were bandia. Nobody's talking about it. It's there in the press. You can produce it. He spent 4 years making statements that are so disparaging to the judiciary, but today he's a saint. I also want to tell you this, which I found extremely, extremely sad. When the Raila and Kalonzo filed their petition, the first statement they are making is, this is a time for the Supreme Court to redeem itself. Now, let me tell you, I thought the judiciary, through the JSC or the president of the Judicial Service Commission, who is the Chief Justice, he should have made it very clear that a statement of that nature before the beginning of the hearing, it's very important, should have been countermanded.
So very quickly.
But he didn't do that.
Very quickly, are you saying that two wrongs make a right?
No,
or are you saying that
what I'm trying to say is we are creating a situation of holier than thou. Now, my point is this, and I want to make it very clear. I'm a judicial officer of the court.
Right.
I will be the last person to do anything or say anything that would impinge on the conduct or the security of the judicial officers, who include the Chief Justice of the Republic of Kenya and all the staff of our judiciary.
You know, Ben, there is something that Jubilee have perfected, and all their supporters and henchmen. There is always an attempt to pivot around, to create a false equivalence over every circumstance. I will slap you on the wrist, and they will compare that to that one time when you burned down my house. The President of the Republic of Kenya occupies a special space in the constitutional order. You cannot compare the President issuing direct threats to the judges saying, we will revisit this issue immediately when we get power, that now I am the guy sitting on the seat. And an unfortunate statement that was made by Raila once, and he was an ordinary citizen. It's like a statement that Sifuna makes. Because I do not wield any state power. You cannot put it on the same pedestal. That is what they always do. So they will run away from explaining the very unfortunate remarks by the president. Somebody who should not do it because he is actually somebody in authority.
But many people would argue, Mr. Sifuna, that Raila Odinga also occupies almost the same pedestal.
He does not. That is the false equivalence that I'm telling you. Raila Odinga is a citizen. He has no control over the state machinery. It is not the same thing when you are threatened by a sweeper here, and when you're threatened by the CEO of this organization that you will be fired. I mean, you cannot create that false equivalence. That's why we need to explain every statement in context. Is it right for somebody who's the head of state, who wields power, who has sworn allegiance to the Constitution, to say those things?
Before you do that, let me be the devil's advocate, Mrs. Sifuna, again. Today, one of the things the CJ said is that the judiciary is an arm of government equal to both the executive and the legislature.
It's not the CJ saying that. That's what the Constitution says.
If that is the case, then why should he complain when he is criticized? Because the other arms of government are also criticized.
Listen, he is not complaining about criticism. You can criticize a judgment. You can say this is not correct in accordance with the law. They misapplied the law. They misunderstood the facts. But you cannot go to the extent where you are threatening to revisit them. You are threatening to abolish the offices of the Supreme Court judges. You are threatening their families. I mean, you have to draw the distinction.
Hold that thought, Mr. Kabage will come. Just hold that thought. Let's pay our bills a bit. Let's take a quick commercial break here on KIVUMBI 2017. We are speaking about what's happening in the Kenyan judiciary. Do you think the Kenyan judiciary, especially the Supreme Court of Kenya, is under siege? Tell us what you think. Let's take a quick commercial break. We're back with this discussion shortly.